Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Alrighty, hello there folks, how you doing? Today I'm uploading a small portion of my interview with retired FBI agent Steve Moore. Mainly the first two questions. Because those questions I had a lot of introduction and I was referring to some other things that I wasn't actually showing. So what I wanted to do is go ahead and extract those two questions from the Steve Moore interview, and this time when they play, you guys this time will see the actual documentation inserted to explain exactly what it is I am talking about to Steve, so that you, the viewer, will see exactly what I'm talking about. Which I did not show Steve. It's possible Steve may have seen these things at some point, but I did not actually show them to Steve. Steve's answers are completely Steve's, based on his experience as a retired FBI agent. But I wanted to go ahead and give the viewers, the actual visual proof of what it is I'm talking about, and that sort of thing. So that's what these are. These are the first two questions from the Steve Moore interview, with a little extra information added in. Hope you guys enjoy it. Here we go. A great pleasure of mine to have here Mr. Steve Moore, who you can see. He is, some of you may know from another video on my channel that's very popular where I spoke with him. He's a retired FBI agent. He was actually somewhat involved in the Amanda Knox case. And obviously is very knowledgeable about investigations. So it's great to have you here with us, Steve. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing okay. I mean, in the midst of everything that's going on, I suppose I'm doing pretty well.
All right, so here we are with Steve Moore, and I got some questions for him because obviously, folks, you know me. I am pounding and pounding and pounding on the Brendan nail, and I will not stop. I'm going to just keep going at it. And we all know Brendan's in a position right now where Governor Evers could rectify this whole thing. You know, he could at least let Brendan go. And that's what Brendan's lawyers are advocating for, and that's what they're applying that pressure on Governor Evers. So I wanted to go ahead and focus on talking about Brendan today while we're here talking to Steve, and get some of his opinions about Fassbender, Wiegert, and some of their methods, and just hear some of the common sense stuff that Steve has to say when it comes to Brendan, obviously. So so I have some questions for you here, and
all right.
All right. First question I want to get into is it's been pretty well established. There's been an under the hood analysis done by a professor at the Wisconsin School of Law, or at the University of Wisconsin School of Law, and a speech language pathologist, where they really went under the hood in the Brennan interrogation, and they came up with some things, and what it's becoming very clear is that most people agree that the facts were fed to Brendan by the investigators.
Oh yeah. And
with some things coming from the media, obviously, because he and his family were watching the media because they were in it every night. So certainly he was being able to pick up some things from the media to help fill in between the gaps between what he was being fed, right? So it's pretty well established, right? All right, so what we're looking at here is from the on-bank panel decision. This is dissenting judge, Chief Judge Wood, her dissenting opinion. And in her dissenting opinion, she points out how the majority's opinion is completely overlooking these things. And this is what I was talking about to Steve, and why I wanted to show you this before Steve goes on to answer, that this is what I'm basically talking about. And this is from Chief Judge Wood of the 7th Circuit in her dissent to the majority judges at the on-bank review. Okay, so what this is laying out a critical fact that Brendan supposedly gave during his confession. And then it said, and then she has the section there for why it's not so critical, or at least why it's not critical, because it needs to actually come from Brendan for it to be critical. And then it talks about how it was coerced. So you see these three columns, and that's what she goes through on each one of these facts, right? So starting with the first one, Halbach was shot in the head. Why it is not critical? Dassey was fed this fact through the leading question after unsuccessful guessing. Tell us, and what else did you do? Come on, something with the head, Brendan. After Dassey guesses cutting her hair, punching her, and cutting her throat, and all right, I'm just going to come out and ask you who shot her in the head. So there's how that one got to. That's how that one ends up entering into the confession, not from or into the interrogation, coercion confession, because it didn't come from Brendan. It came from the investigators. Okay, next, let's move on. Dassey's jeans were stained with bleach. This evidence, why it is not critical, this evidence corroborates Dassey's trial testimony. Why and how it was coerced. Dassey testified that his jeans became stained with bleach while he helped his uncle clean up what looked like some automotive fluid spill. Critical fact, the RAV4's license plates were removed. Dassey was fed this fact through a leading question. How it was done? How were the license plates taken off of the car? Who did that? On February 27th, the investigator also asked, did he tell you if he did anything with the license plates? So you see that there were leading questions to give Brendan this information so that he knew what they were looking for. Critical fact, Dassey sexually assaulted Halbach while she was handcuffed to the bed. Why it is not critical. The physical evidence does not corroborate this fact. How it was coerced. There was no evidence of handcuffs chafing against the headboard. The handcuffs and leg irons found in Avery's room contained no fingerprints or DNA from Dassey or from Halbach. The physical evidence found in Avery's bed is non-probative. Is another reason why this is not a critical fact. The plastic film from around the bed's spindle was polypropylene, which, according to the state's forensic scientist, is found in garments, in addition to plastic containers and rope manufacturing. Let's see here. The detail was drawn from popular media. Dassey testified that he concocted this detail from Kiss the Girls, a book he read, where a woman is restrained during a sexual assault. And besides the fact that the investigators were making it pretty clear that they thought a rape was going on, that he heard screams, that he heard, anyways. So, right, the next fact. Halbach was in the back of the RAV4. The media widely publicized that Halbach's blood was found in the back of the car. Right, the media, just like I said. This fact appeared in news stories. Critical fact. The RAV4's battery cables were disconnected. Why it is not critical. Dassey was fed the fact that Avery went under the RAV4 hood through a leading question after he unsuccessfully guessed. And that's exactly right. Okay, what else did he do? He did something else. You need to tell us what he did. After that car is parked there, it's extremely important, before you guys leave that car. After Dassey responded that Avery left a gun in the car, that's not what I'm thinking about. He did something to that car. He took the plates and I believe he did something else in that car. I don't know, Brendan says. Okay, did he go and look at the engine? Did he raise the hood at all or anything like that? And so this is basically the investigators leading Dassey to say what they want him to say. And that's why this is not a critical fact. And this is why it doesn't, it's ridiculous to say that these things are convincing of Dassey's guilt, because they're not. Critical fact, Halbach was shot in the garage. Why it is not critical. In addition to being fed that she was shot, Dassey was fed that she was shot in the garage after initially denying she ever went in there. Was she ever in the garage? No. Investigators led him, saying, again, we know that some things happened in the garage and in that car. We know that you need to tell us about this so we know you're telling us the truth. Shortly after they asked, tell us where she was shot. In the head. No, I mean where in the garage. After Dassey answered that she was shot in the truck and not on the garage floor, come on now, where was she shot? Be honest here. The truth. In the garage. So they basically just corralled him into saying in the garage, And that's basically what. And so Judge Wood has made these to point all these so-called critical facts out for what they are. Nothing but you know, bogus, you know, claims, really. So, critical fact, Halbach's camera and phone were burned in the barrel. Dassey was fed this fact through a leading question on February 27th. Then on March 1st, he guessed that these items were burned. On February 27th, did he tell you anything about her other possessions? She probably had her cell phone, a camera to take pictures. After Dassey denied putting anything in the burn barrel or knowing whether she had a purse, cell phone, or a camera, he was pressed about what happened to these items and guessed Avery burned them. The only possessions he said he saw in the burn barrel were those fed to him, like a cell phone, camera, or purse. So it basically only spits back what's suggested to him. That's exactly right. Okay, critical fact. Halbach's remains were burned in the bonfire pit. Why it is not critical. Fed fact and media reports could have easily supplied Brendan with that information. On February 27th, investigators said, I find it quite difficult to believe that if there is a body in that fire, Brendan, that you wouldn't have seen something like a hand, a foot, a head or hair or something. Media had reported her remains were found there. So there you go. I mean, that's where Brendan would know that. So that's not very, for him to say anything regarding that, well, it means nothing because him and his family were watching the news every day. And this stuff was in the news, and so they would have known that. So it's not like only he could have known it. If supposedly he was the killer, only he could have known it. No, the press knew it. It was being broadcast all over Wisconsin. Dassey resisted the suggestion that Halbach had a tattoo. This is the control question, folks. Judge Woods pointing out the control question. Dassey's response seems to accept the suggestion that she had a tattoo when she didn't, because it's a fake fact, right? We know that Teresa had a tattoo on her stomach. Do you remember that? He shakes his head. No, Do you disagree with me when I say that? No, but I don't know where it was. So what he just did there, folks, was number one, he first disagreed with the investigator about a fake fact. And what this isn't telling you is that it's a fake fact. Teresa did not have a tattoo on her stomach like the investigator said. This is what's called the control question, where they were trying to test Brendan's honesty. So at first he says, But I guess Tom Fassbender didn't really like that answer, and he wanted something a little better, so he presses it, and he says, do you disagree with me when I say that? To which Brendan says no. That means he agrees with Tom Fassbender that she had a tattoo she didn't have. So right there, number one, this question that she's referring to does not prove Dassey's guilt. It proves exactly the opposite, and that's her pointing that out right there. So this is what I was getting at when I was leading into this question, or when I was asking this question for Steve. So now let me go ahead and get to Steve's answer. I wanted to ask you if you can explain, or just give us a brief, example possibly, or something of why it's so important not to be feeding your suspect facts. At least certainly not in the gross amount of facts that are being fed to Brendan.
Well, it's in a perfect world, in a real courtroom, especially a federal courtroom, there's a thing called culpable knowledge. Culpable knowledge is something that only the person who did the crime would know, except possibly for the investigators. Say the person wrote something in the room, maybe wrote something on a wall. And the police or the FBI or whoever it is, they're the only ones who know what was written on the wall.
Right.
So if you get somebody who comes in and says, I shouldn't have written blah, blah, blah on the wall, or worst case for them is, yeah, I heard whoever it did wrote so on the wall. Then here's somebody who knows it. If in trial they can prove that you told this person what was on the wall or gave them the information, then it's no longer culpable knowledge.
Right.
And it's more important. It should be more important than do I get a conviction or not. As a law enforcement investigator, I was always terrified of getting the wrong person, of getting onto the wrong person, because if I put somebody in jail, I'm responsible for quite a bit of that. And a lot of people
And
don't
curtailing
understand.
their freedom, and sure, yeah, that's a heavy weight to consider, yeah.
Listen, there are people whose cases I worked on who will be there for
Right.
longer than I live, if they live longer than that.
Right.
And I can tell you a funny thing that happened to me, and I can remember the first time the judge, the jury read off guilty, and the judge pronounced sentence. I went cold inside because I realized, oh my gosh, this is what I've been working for. This is what I fought to get, and now it's done. And then that thought, did you get it right? I mean, I was half the afternoon not being able to eat, going back over every single investigative step I took, and I wanted to be right.
Because of how much is in the scales, right? I mean,
oh yeah, you're taking away a person's life or parts of it,
right?
And if an investigator doesn't feel just a twinge of that at the end of an investigation, I don't think they understand the gravity of what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I mean, and what happened with Brendan is certainly, it's obvious to look at it on the surface, but the more and more analysis gets done, it begins to become more and more obvious, I think. But but
it should have been obvious to any good investigator. It should have been obvious from the first videos that came out. Right. I don't know how anybody could look at that and say he had culpable knowledge of that crime or any other crime.
Exactly. Watching the whole thing, you realize it's all suggested to him in ways like the next question actually will suggest. And one of the things in the under the hood analysis that I was mentioning to you, that one of the things that came out was they were analyzing the types of questions asked and how many of each type of question were asked. And one of the really interesting stats that came out was the fact that they had asked him an insane number of yes or no questions. Very few open-ended questions. Fair amount of actually multiple choice questions where they were basically asking the question and proposing a few different answers, and those types of questions. But like an astronomical amount of yes or no questions. And what they were saying in this analysis is when you ask somebody a yes or no question, you are conveying a great deal of information in the asking of it, because you're kind of coming up with a premise essentially and asking about it, right? So it's like if it's a yes or no question. So, okay, this is an excerpt from the paper I was talking about with Steve. Did not show this to Steve. The answer you're going to see Steve give is basically based solely on his own experience as a retired law enforcement, retired FBI agent. So what I want to introduce here is they're talking about who did the talking. In this particular part is going to be talking about the questioning of Fassbender and Wiegert of Brendan. What you also need to understand is that at the beginning of this paper, the speech language pathologist and the professor at University of Wisconsin School of Law both established that Brendan was diagnosed with an SLP that made him particularly susceptible and overwhelmed by too much verbiage and that sort of stuff, and also authority figures and that sort of thing. So it's important to note that going in here as we continue here reading this. Okay, so here we go. Who did the talking? Whether in a clinical or a forensic setting, the person questioning an adolescent with a language impairment should sit back and let the interviewee do the talking as much as possible. In this interview, the questioners did anything but. There was a remarkable disparity in the amount of talking done by the police and Brendan, and although Brendan was the informant, the police spoke more than twice as much, or 2.5 times as much as Brendan. The police used a total of 18,325 words in the 2 interviews we focused on, while Brendan used only 6,998 words, making his contribution a mere 28% of the total interview. These numbers alone tell us that this interview was utterly inappropriate for Brendan. So this is a visual representation of what that paragraph was just saying. So you can see here, this is the February 27th interview here. So this is Wiegert and Fassbender's number of words. If you guys can see here, this is 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, 14,000, and 16,000 here. So you can see it's about 3,000, a little about maybe close to 3,500 or so here. And then this one here is up, I don't know, looks like it's right around 15,000. So 3,500 plus 15,000 is, as it's set up here, 18,325 words. So, okay. So this is a visual representation, and then this is Brendan here. His words contributed, compared to this, right? Okay. So that's one thing, the amount of verbiage alone. Okay, moving on to the next thing, the types of questions asked. The questions were rarely simple, standalone affairs. Wiegert and Fassbender sometimes used a series of questions without pausing, or rephrased and recycled questions when Brendan answered no. They mixed question types, beginning with an open-ended question, and without pausing, posed questions that suggested the content they wanted, and then asking him about the information they put into their own questions. We were, however, ultimately able to sort out the questions well enough to classify them by type. Almost all of Wiegert and Fassbender's questions, 98%, were question types containing high amounts of content. Yes or no questions, who, what, when, where, why questions, and multiple choice questions, setting up maximal conditions for contamination, confusion, and for someone like Brendan, intimidation. With these high numbers, it is clear that it was the questions themselves, not Brendan's answers, that were the main vehicles for introducing huge amounts of content into the interview. Right? So basically it's saying that using these types of questions, the interviewers were injecting their own narrative. And here is a representation of the types of questions asked. Okay? So this is yes or no questions on the February 27th. Okay? This is who, what, when, where, why questions, which also convey a great deal of information in the asking. These are the multiple choice questions here. And these are the questions that should have been being asked the most. These are open-ended questions. And these should have been, there should have been more of these questions than these other ones. So it's very interesting, and that's what they're pointing out in this paper, of how lopsided this is and how wrong this is. And same thing for the March 1st interview here. Way more yes or no questions, which convey a lot of information in the asking. A lot more who, what, when, where, why questions. And a whole lot more multiple choice questions. Which you are going to hear, Steve Moore referred to as just stupid coming here. So, all right. Just wanted to show everybody that just before you hear Steve Moore weigh in on it. And by using questions like that, so I want to ask you your opinion. Did they teach you as an investigator to at least limit the amount of yes or no questions that you ask in an interview?
Well, obviously you want to, because what you're looking for is them to tell you something you don't already know. I mean, think about it. There's an interview when you're trying to elicit information that you don't have. That's one. Mm-hmm. And number two is an interrogation, when you are trying to elicit a confession. Right. Yes or no questions are for interrogations, not interviews. Yes or no questions, number one, as you say, they provide information to the person you're interviewing. Right. Did Jane Doe scream "don't"? Well, apparently, and now he's bookmarked it in his mind, she may have screamed "don't." Okay. Right. Then you get another yes or no question down the line where they say, when she screamed "don't," were you holding her down? Well, now I know she actually did scream "don't." So right. Yes or no questions are terribly dangerous. Sure. Multiple choice questions are just stupid. Because what the person knows is, well, the correct answer is one of those. Right. Because they've told me it's one of those. So yeah, you don't do that. And in an interview, what you're trying to do is elicit information. Find out what actually went on. It is an honest exercise in trying to figure out what went wrong. when you're asking all yes or no questions, don't tell me that you are trying to elicit information that you don't have. You've already decided what's true.
And you're steering things, right?
You are steering the person, and I have no problems with an interrogation to try and get a confession if I have the case made without their help.
Right.
And now that I'm retired, I can tell you this: if I had the case made against them, and a confession would help,
right,
I would walk in and tell them that. Listen, I got the case made against you. I don't need your help. If you want to talk to me, I'm here to listen. But otherwise, I'm going. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. I don't need your help. And you'd be surprised how many people want to say, no, wait a minute, wait. And they try to talk you out of it. And in talking you out of it, they do, give information up.
Right.
But at the point they were with Brendan, nothing was known.
In other words, it's supposed to be an interview, right?
Yes. And how can you interrogate somebody for a crime that you don't know the facts of?
Right.
How can you want them to confess to something? I mean, yes, in an interview, you would like a guilty person to tell you that they did it and go forward from there.
Right.
But you are still trying to elicit whether or not they did it. You don't come in deciding that they did.
There's a different approach for an interrogation than there is for an interview. Absolutely. Is
Yeah,
what you're saying.
I can suspect somebody has done it, but I can tell you there have been several times in my career where I have suspected somebody's done something, brought them in for an interview, and realized, hey, Steve, you may be wrong here. And if an investigator is not willing to look at themselves in a mirror and say, hey, dude, you're fallible, then you don't belong there.
Yeah, right. It's good to be conscientious. I agree with that. So
it helps you sleep at night.
You would helps you sleep at night, and that's why I like talking to Steve more. So the reason why I made this video, folks, was to pull out those first two questions, because I felt like the information that I was referring to at the beginning of those questions when I was asking Steve, I felt it was important. So I want to go ahead and pull those two out and actually insert the information I was referring to and make it very clear so people can see exactly what I'm talking about. And I think it helps to inform Steve's answer to my question even more. So I made this as an easily shareable video that will be shorter than the original, obviously a little bit shorter than the original, but it will be packed with the information that shows what it is that I'm referring to in my lead up in my question for Steve. So that's what we're trying to obviously focus on here, is exactly why this case against Brendan Dassey is bogus, completely bogus. It's all smoke and mirrors. There's no substance to it. Everything came from the investigators, and that's essentially what the under hood analysis really points out. I will leave a link to the under the hood analysis below for everybody to check out. I will also leave a link to my full interview with Steve Moore, which aired during Mammothon, but I will leave a link to the interview with Steve Moore down below. So for those of you who haven't gotten a chance to check that out yet, you can. So I hope everybody found this interesting and informative. Everybody stay safe. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.